was an interesting exercise that took us in some interesting directions. Though I will confess I didn't quite cover one of the topics as I should have. I still have some homework to do on that one, and I will come back to it. But it was a great experience. But this morning, on this little orphan Sunday before the beginning of the season of Lent, I didn't quite know what to preach about, and so I decided to go back and revisit those original suggestions that you made, and pick out one that you didn't select. Now, there's a few reasons why I wanted to pick out this one. One, I will admit right here, for the sake of clarity, one reason was because it was originally suggested by my eldest daughter, and she wasn't going to let me get away without preaching on it. There is that. But that's not really the main reason why I wanted to take it up. Because it is a suggestion that takes us very deep into some very important issues that we need to understand and explore. Issues that take us to the heart of what it really means to be human. Now, the question that was asked is very simple, very straightforward. Where is Eden? And it's the kind of question that you would think should be fairly easy to answer. Because we have this story right there in the book of Genesis of something that happened to two people in a very particular place. And what's more, the location is described right there in Genesis. And so you would think that we should be able to open the book and then open up a map and take a pin and stick it right in. Say it was right there. We should be able to look it up on Google Maps. But here's the thing. That story of Eden is a deceptively simple story. And the more you look at it and the deeper you look into it, the more complex it gets. The more you look at it, the less you seem to understand it. One of those stories. And that goes for how the story is told, but it also goes for how it is located. The geography of Eden, when you look into it, gets more and more complex. This is how the location of Eden is described in Genesis. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are also there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, and it flows east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. Simple, right? All we have to do is locate those 4 rivers, the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, and follow them back to their source, because of course it says they all arise from one stream, and that stream flows from the Garden of Eden. Boom, we've got it. Except, well, maybe it's not quite that simple, is it? Because first of all, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in simple geography. Because what is described there is not how rivers commonly function. Rivers, apart from deltas, of course, apart from deltas, rivers do not divide into separate streams as they flow along. What usually happens with rivers is as they flow from their source to the ocean, they converge, they come together. So this is kind of the opposite of what we normally see happening in the world. There's the first problem. So, one difficulty there, but at least you might think if we could just find those 4 rivers, if we could identify them, we could at least come up with a rough location for Eden. Well, that brings us to the second problem. We can only actually clearly identify half of those rivers. Two of them, the Tigris and the Euphrates, are very well-known rivers, of course. They are the rivers that flow to this very day through the country of Iraq. The country also known as Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers. So, since those two rivers are clearly known and understood, and we know exactly where they are, it has been suggested by some, well, all we have to do, therefore, is forget about the other two. We don't know where they are. And follow the Tigris and the Euphrates to their source. And the source of these two rivers is actually quite close to each other, though, of course, they do not arise from the same stream. But the source of these two rivers is in southern Turkey. There, some would say, there is where Eden was. Okay. But what about those other two rivers? We can't just forget about them, can we? Yes, we don't recognize their names, but maybe there are some other hints of where they might be. The first river name is called the Pishon. And we do not know the name of that river, we don't know where it is, but some things are said about it. We are told, for example, that the Pishon runs through the land called Havilah. Now, we don't know where Havilah is either, but this land is described. And it's described as a land that is rich in gold. There is much fine gold there. There is also bdellium, a precious resin, and onyx stones. Now, this land of Havilah, ancient Israelites seem to have believed they knew where it was. At least there was a tradition that was passed down and was reported by a first-century writer Josephus, who identifies the Pishon and the land of Havilah with the river Ganges and the land of India. Kind of makes sense. India was a fabled land in the ancient world, a land where there were many riches. It could well be that the Pishon is supposed to be the Ganges River. So we possibly have three rivers now. The next one is the Gihon. Now the Gihon is a little bit difficult because we actually know of a stream called the Gihon that was well known to the ancient people of Israel. It was a stream that flowed from a spring on the top of Mount Zion. Mount Zion being, of course, the mountain on which the city of Jerusalem was built. And you can still, to this very day, go to Jerusalem and find the source of the Gihon stream. So we have this little stream. Not a significant stream, a very small stream, but of course, an important stream as far as the city of Jerusalem is concerned. Because the very existence of this stream, the water it produced, made the existence of that city possible. Made the temple of the Lord possible. Now, some people have said that this Gihon stream is so insignificant it couldn't possibly be the stream that is talked about in the book of Genesis. But I'm not so sure. Because this little stream, small as it is, comes up again and again as you go through the Bible. Very significant things happened at this spring. Jesus performed healings at this spring. It's a significant place for biblical history. Not only that, but the final vision of the Bible in the book of Revelations is the vision of a river that flows from the top of Mount Zion. A river that is quite clearly the Gihon transformed. This is how it's described in the book of Revelations. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city of Jerusalem. On either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nation. So that is the description of paradise at the end of the Bible. And at the center of that description is a river, the Gihon, and a tree of life. It is a perfect mirror to the description of paradise at the beginning of the story, where the tree of life also grows beside a river, and one of those rivers is called the Gihon. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a message in that. So possibly this Gihon is the little stream that flowed through Jerusalem. But there is another possibility. Because, of course, the story of Genesis does give us one other detail about this river Gihon. It says that it flows around the whole land of Cush. And the land of Cush was a place that was well known to the ancient people of Israel. It was a region in North Africa, somewhere around what we would call the Sudan and Ethiopia today. And as it turns out, in the land of Cush there is one very important river, the longest river in the world. It is called the Nile. So possibly the Gihon is the Nile. Now that gets interesting. These four rivers of Eden can possibly be identified as the Ganges, the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Significant and interesting because these were the four key rivers that were known to the ancient world. Even more significant, from these four rivers grew up the very idea of civilization itself. For the first great civilizations of the world were first of all in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then in Egypt along the banks of the Nile, and then in India along the course of the Ganges. And that makes this description of Eden as alongside these four rivers very meaningful, very significant on a symbolical level. To think of these three great civilizations flowing from the origins in the Garden of Eden. So it makes a lot of sense symbolically. The problem is, of course, that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense geographically, right? Because not only are these four rivers very far apart, they are located on three different continents. One flows through Africa. Two flow through Asia, one flows through the Indian subcontinent. And what are we supposed to do with that? The more we understand about these four rivers, the less we seem able to pinpoint any one location. Well, we all know that we as modern people struggle on a certain level with this whole story of the Garden of Eden and the story of Adam and Eve. We struggle with the thought of being able to read it as a literal historical account because, of course, we have been presented with all kinds of evidence to show us that the origins of humankind is a little bit more complicated than just the story of two people in a garden. But there was more to it than that. We're also very much aware, I think, of the discoveries of anthropologists who have found traces of the earliest humans spread throughout various parts of Africa, and who tell a very complex story of the origins of the human race. So we struggle with this story of Eden. We say, how can we read this as a simple, literal, historical account? And most of us don't. But have you ever considered that perhaps the ancient people of Israel also had reason not to read this as a simple, literal, historical account? Yes, their knowledge of the world was very limited. Their knowledge of geography was very limited. But perhaps they understood enough to realize that these four rivers described there in the book of Genesis we're not just far apart, but we're located on 3 different continents. So maybe for them, when they thought about the location of Eden, they didn't locate it in one single place either in their minds. I mean, however they understood it in terms of historical events, they did understand that the story of Eden and what happened there was about more than just the story of 2 people in some particular place. It was a very meaningful, very symbolic story to them. And that meaning and symbolism mattered more than anything. What is the story of the Garden of Eden about? It is about God's intentions for this world. The description of the garden is about God's design, God's will for this world. It is an indication that it was God's will that this planet, that this place, would be a place where we could live at peace with one another, at peace with nature, where the resources of this world could be shared freely and equally and justly. That was what God wanted. That's what the description of the garden is about. And the problem is, the story tells us, the problem is that we messed that up. We messed that up by rebelling against God's design and purpose for this world. We messed it up with our greed. We messed it up with our racism and our tribalism by resorting again and again to violence and oppression. We have messed up God's original plan. That's what the story of Eden is about. And if that's what the story is about, it is a story that is far too big for one time and one place. Because it is a story that is played out again and again as the human race has spread all over this planet. Again and again, we have messed up the design. We've taken it in our own way, and we have made a mess of it. And so in many ways, it is very fitting to think of the place, this place, Eden, as being every place, as locating it in Africa, and in Asia, and in India. And while we're at it, let's say that it also takes place in Europe, and North and South America, and in Australia. Wherever we have gone, we have played out this story again, again, and again. And what if the Gihon is not supposed to be the Nile, but it is supposed to be that little stream that flowed from Mount Zion in Jerusalem? Well, that also would be meaningful. Because that was the capital city of the people who told this story. It was where they lived. It was where they made their choices. Where they saw the potential for reestablishing that garden, that place of equality, that place of perfect sharing, but where they also messed it up day after day. It was a place where they got it wrong. See, the real question is not where was Eden. The more we look at it, the more we realize we cannot pin that down. The real question is the question as it was placed in the original suggestion. The question is, where is Eden? And the answer is that Eden is where we are. Eden is wherever we have spread. Eden is where we have taken God's potential, messed it up, and turned it sour, and gone far from the plan. Now maybe, I can't help but think that maybe on some level it was inevitable that the design of the garden would fail. Because as we are told the story, God set up this garden, this perfect environment in which we could live, and He said, you can keep this garden, but only so long as you do not eat of the tree of knowledge. How likely was it that we were going to resist that rule? Because we as human beings have ever felt the pull for knowledge. We've ever sought after knowledge, ever quested after the power that it can give us. It's part of who we are. And you know what? That quest for knowledge is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, all kinds of good have come and continue to come from that ongoing quest for knowledge. Where would we be without the knowledge we found in this world? And yet, at the same time, we cannot help but admit that that quest for knowledge has brought with it costs. And terrible things have come out of our quest for knowledge at all costs. That's what the story of the garden is about too. That contradiction of questing after knowledge and finding great things, and yet also there being a cost. That's where we are. Eden is where we are. The good news, though, is this. God has a plan. God has a plan to bring us back to the best of the garden. That peaceful coexistence, that living alongside nature, that living alongside one another, and sharing resources well and justly and fairly. God has a plan for doing all that without losing the benefit of the knowledge that we have found. Jesus was part of that plan. And you can be too. God's plan is what we are going to continue to talk about as we move through the season of Lent in the coming weeks. But now take a few moments in silence.